Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for this MIFA webinar, the college process for undocumented students. And we're so lucky, I feel so fortunate to have our presenter today, Andrea Keenan. And Andrea will tell you a little bit about herself, but she is really very knowledgeable on this topic, and I think has a really terrific way of delivering this information and providing lots of resources. So I hope you find this helpful. I will also say that I put the slides, a PDF of the slides in the chat, but we've been having problems with this part of the technology of Zoom. So I guess I will ask you, if you can't see the slides in the chat, to at some point during the webinar, just let me know that you can't, and maybe how you're logged in to Zoom, and that will just help our IT folks figure this out. But no matter what, I will forward to you tomorrow a recording of this webinar and a copy of the slides, so you'll have them to be able to look back on and to share if you need to. But if you can, let me know that in the chat. That's super helpful. I'll also say that we would love to help you with your questions. I know Andrea is always so generous to answer all of your questions. So I'm going to ask if you can put your questions in the Q&A section. That lets me keep track of them, and then I will be able to pose them to Andrea. And I'm hearing from someone that if I share the slides, maybe now that you're already joined, you'll be able to see them. So I will try that, and you can keep letting me know, and we're gonna get this figured out. We've had this problem for a week or so. So thank you so much for your help with that. And with that, I would just say that for those of you who don't know MIFA, MIFA is a not-for-profit organization here in Massachusetts, and we have savings plans, and we have lower cost loans, and then we have a lot of guidance to families at whatever stage your student is in the education process, the college process. And so you can find many more webinars on different topics at mifa.org/events. And with that, I will turn it over to you, Andrea, and thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much, Julie and MIFA, for having me. Can you hear me okay, Julie? Just a tech test. Okay. Everyone, we are on Zoom. I wish we could be in person, which means I'm in my house. You may hear a dog bark at a certain point, so don't be alarmed if that happens. I'll try to make sure that doesn't happen, but just wanted to give you a little warning. It's been happening recently when I'm on the computer. I am so grateful to be here and spend this time with you. We've got about an hour, maybe 55-ish minutes, and the time always flies by. I want to just start by saying that this webinar today is geared towards students and families. I will be addressing the audience as if you were a student and family member of an undocumented student or a student that has immigration concerns. Last week, I did a similar webinar focused on counseling. So if you're a high school counselor looking to learn more about this topic, we have that recording, and you can look into the MIFA Institute for that. So I just wanted to kind of say that if you are a high school counselor in the audience, please still stay, but you'll hear me address the students and the families directly. With that being said, if you all don't mind maybe putting in the chat, if you are a student, a family member, or from a high school organization, I think that would help me kind of get a sense of if I'm talking to mostly students or mostly families or mostly counselors. So that if you don't mind doing that in the next few seconds, that would be so helpful for me. Awesome. I'm seeing a lot of high school counselors. I see student in there. Hi, counselor, student, lots of students. Awesome. See some social workers. Awesome. Yes. CACBU advisor. Love it. Parent re-engagement specialist. Counselors, social workers. Awesome. Yeah, so it's pretty split. So if you are an adult that works with undocumented students, please also watch the webinar from last week, because I think that you'll find that really helpful as well. So let's get started. Today, I'm hoping to just introduce myself for those of you that don't know me or haven't been to any of my trainings in the past. I'm going to try to only talk for about 40 minutes. It's really hard for me. I go way over most of the time. So I think to Julie's point, if you want to pop questions in the Q&A as we go through, we'll make sure we pause and address those as we go as well. That way we can keep this flowing and doesn't have to be such a hard stop at the end for Q&A. And I got a few other, awesome, cool. Okay, so welcome everyone. Who am I? Who is talking to you right now? My name is Andrea Keenan. I'm Director of College and Career Counseling at Excel Academy Charter High School. I have 9 years of education access experience, 5 of those years as a counselor. I was born in Mexico City and I immigrated to the United States in the 90s. So I am a part of the immigrant population in this country. I am an immigrant proudly. I'm also first generation, so I am the first in my family to go to college, both in Mexico and here in the US. But I want to be clear that I am not undocumented. And this is really important because I'm not currently undocumented. So I am an ally, proud one, and an advocate in my work. For the last 9 years, I've really tried to work with this population that I feel so close to because I've experienced so many of these struggles myself. But I don't want to take away from the voices of the students and adults that are currently undocumented. So I just want to be upfront about that. I do speak from experience, but I'm not currently undocumented. I think it's really important as we become allies in this movement, because it really is a movement, that we honor the voices and experiences, the lived experiences of those who are currently undocumented, and that us as allies don't overshadow that and really empower you, the students and families who are facing currently immigration concerns, really empower you to use your voice, because you have a voice and you have rights. So I'm so excited to be here. And my message to the students in the audience in this moment that comes from not only my experience as a counselor, but as an immigrant is very simple. You are not defined by your immigration status. It is an important part of how sometimes you navigate the world because it affects us in so many different ways every single day. But as an immigrant, I want to sort of honor that it is a struggle to be an immigrant, and especially if you're undocumented, but you are not defined by that. You are so much more than that. It is an important part of your life, but you are your goals, you are your likes, your dislikes, your strengths, your passions, your people around you, your pride, your work, your stories, your beliefs, your fight, because we all have some fight in us, your voice, and so much more. And I start this presentation or this training for you today, students and families, and for the counselors also listening, is that this is the backbone of working with students who are facing immigration statuses, is how do we get creative? How do we get creative so that you can reach your goals? And that is what I often tell students and families, is that a complex immigration status or a lack of status makes it so that we simply have to get more creative in this process. So if you are here, it means that you want to apply to either college or that you have some pretty serious goals for yourself after high school, whether that includes a 2-year college, a 4-year college, maybe some employment. You have some goals. You can still get to those goals, but the way that you get to those goals might look a little different than maybe a friend that isn't undocumented or a friend that doesn't have to necessarily worry about immigration status. So that is sort of like what I want to anchor us in our time together today, is that message that it can happen. It might look a little different the way that that happens, but that you have rights, you have a voice, and hopefully you have people around you that can help you make those things a reality with a little information, with a little research, and by not giving up. And sometimes it is easy to get discouraged, right? I've been there. I've been there personally, and I've been there as a counselor. Navigating this with a complex immigration status or with no status makes it so that sometimes you have good days, like, oh, things are going well for me today, or not so good days. Oh, I called this office and no one in the office seemed to know how to handle my status. Things can get discouraging, but don't give up. There is no right pathway to reach your goals. So find people that you trust and ask for help. Perhaps you can also, if you're here today, because I see at least 10 students in the audience today, perhaps you share this presentation with other friends or people that couldn't be here today that could benefit from this information. And this is also an ask for counselors, but also for you as a student. Get creative, learn about resources, and you're not alone. So that is sort of my beginning message for all of us. And now I want to transition into thinking about more of the nitty gritty, sort of what you need to know about applying to college and some of the most common questions that I get. The first part of this presentation is going to be very college heavy, but then I kind of go into other non-college paths toward the end. So again, drop your questions in the chat as we keep going, and I'll have a few checkpoints, and I'll check the Q&A to make sure that we're not forgetting to address any of your questions. So here we go. This might seem basic, but it bears repeating. Can undocumented people go to college? I get this all the time, surprisingly, especially in Boston. Boston is a sanctuary city. I still get this question a lot. Yes, 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 yes. There is no federal law that prohibits the admission of undocumented immigrants to US colleges, okay? Federal or state laws do not require students to prove citizenship in order to enter private US institutions of higher education, but some public campuses might have differing policies across the United States. So there's no federal law that says you can't go, but at the state level, there are some states that are a little bit harder when it comes to their public campuses. So the tricky thing is, for so many students, okay, for the most part, I can apply, I can get into college, is how are we gonna pay for it? So that's kind of the second layer of this question. But I just wanna show you this map. If you're new to this topic, or if you are just curious, I like this map because it shows how different these policies are across the United States. And when I saw this for the first time, I had a lot of feelings. I had some feelings of, wow, some states are really far ahead. Wow, this makes me angry. Some states are not that inclusive. And I don't want to single any states out necessarily. So I want to just point out a few things. The first is the dark green states. So California, for example, has tuition equity laws, which means that regardless of status, whether you're undocumented or not, if you're a resident of California, you get access to state campuses at the same rate, which is awesome. So like that's pretty great. And not only that, but the state public colleges of California, for example, also give scholarships to undocumented individuals. Really great. Now I want to show you, or your eye might be wandering to Massachusetts, which is where I am currently and where I think most of you are tuning in from. They're gray. Massachusetts does not have tuition equity laws, meaning that when an undocumented student applies to a public campus, they are applying as an out-of-state student. Now, for my counselors in the room, I know you feel a certain way about this. I know I do. We can do something about it. For those of us in the room that have the privilege of having a status that allows us to reside and work here without any issue, we can be good allies, I think, and use our privilege and use our power to advocate for this. This is how all the dark green states became dark green states. So I just kind of wanted to start with that. You know, there is a little piece of advocacy here. That doesn't mean that undocumented students can't apply to a public campus in Massachusetts. That just means it's going to be more expensive, right? So I want to go into then kind of sort of this like context of statuses, because I know that that's often where my students get a little bit confused. Knowledge is power when it comes to status. So right now you're undocumented. You may be currently in the process, maybe with your family, of applying for a status or applying for some sort of relief, immigration relief. I think the first question we need to ask ourselves if we're undocumented or have different statuses is, do I know everything that's out there? Have I reached out to trusted legal aid to see if there's any wiggle room for me or my family in terms of something we could be eligible for immigration-wise? And then for the counselors in the room, fact-finding with your student so that you can really help your student. Immigration statuses, it's a spectrum. It's not as easy as undocumented, I have a status. There's so many layers in between. There's statuses that grant you a citizenship status. There's statuses that grant you I-94 forms like asylum granted, or sorry, asylum pending. Asylum granted grants you a green card, a permanent resident card, a refugee, TPS, temporary protective status, permanent resident, so that's a popular one. That's the green card holder, colloquially known. Conditional permanent resident, that's just a variation of that. It has a different sort of application number with US Citizenship and Immigration Services. The T visa, U visa. So T visa is sadly for victims of human trafficking. It's a very particular type of visa. There are J and F visas, other temporary visas. DACA. DACA is less of a status and more relief from deportation. So it kind of blurs the line a little bit there, but it is a type of protection from deportation. Family-sponsored visas, Violence Against Women Act, self-petitioner. There's been some movement around this on the federal level recently. Special immigrant juvenile status, both of these statuses could potentially lead to permanent residency. And finally, there's the lack of status. From these statuses, the ones highlighted in yellow would grant the beneficiary eligibility for federal financial aid. Now, this is often something that comes up. There might be a student that might self-disclose to you, or you yourself, you're the student, and you think you have asylum, or you've heard your family say, oh, we have asylum, or we're applying for asylum. I think my takeaway from this slide that I hope you get is that it's really important to be informed of what you have, or to seek out trusted legal aid to see if you could be eligible for anything else. The two resources that I always point people to for legal screenings, this is something I encourage my students to do all the time, and families, if you feel comfortable, highly recommend that you seek out trusted legal aid in the community, not notaries, not people that you know from other places, but actual trusted legal aid from organizations that could potentially give you a free legal screening, where someone sits down with you for 10, 15 minutes, doesn't charge you any money or very little money, to where you kind of can share your story with this immigration attorney, and they can say in that short period of time, hey, maybe you do qualify for this, or have you looked into this, and could at least get something started if that's the case. Sometimes a lot of families don't seek out legal aid because there is a real fear. I have felt this too, of I don't want to disclose my status to someone I don't trust. There's two, just to go back, there are two resources I always point my families and students to. If you're in the Boston area, the city of Boston has bi-weekly legal screening clinics. Right now they're virtual, but they are very, very helpful if you don't want to commit to something long-term, you don't want to hire a lawyer, but you just want to see what's out there. These are volunteer attorneys who schedule 15-minute slots with people and can kind of just sit there, hear your story, and maybe give you some ideas or some support, or at the very least, some comfort in knowing that you might have options in the future. So that's the first piece. The second piece is the MIRA Coalition here in Massachusetts. They help immigrants, refugees. They're a wonderful nonprofit organization. They have a directory on their website where you can put in your zip code, and they give you a directory of legal resources, clinics, and entities, practices that help the community, that have low cost community legal services. I would always go through a directory like that if you're looking to work with an immigration attorney. I'm going to check the Q&A. Someone's asking, are there any schools who are undocumented friendly? We're going to get to that. Definitely, really good question. Thank you. These resources that I just talked about, MIRA and the City of Boston resources, are linked later in the presentation. So they're on slide like 22 or something. In case I don't get to that slide for some reason, it's all in there. So when you get the PDF of this, make sure you click through and everything's in the slides. I just wanted to kind of mention them right now in the context of this slide. I wanted to also highlight sort of the differences between two of the most common work authorizations that I see. Now, this is also good for our students to know, to kind of take responsibility for, or kind of fact find what you have, but also for counselors to know the difference between a permanent resident card and an employment authorization card. Any status that receives a permanent resident, otherwise known as a green card, can receive federal financial aid. So if you know that you are the holder of this, you can apply for federal financial aid via the FAFSA. If you have an employment authorization card, the blue and red one, it's still awesome because you can work in the United States and you can do a lot with that work social security number, but it unfortunately means that you don't qualify for federal or state aid, okay, via the FAFSA. But you may be eligible for in-state tuition. I'm going to talk a little bit about that in just a minute. Now, the confusing part about this is that both of these cards, both of these people that have these cards have what's called a USCIS number. So it's sort of that third line. A lot of students sometimes get confused if they have an employment authorization card and you have a social security number. You might think, oh, I can file the FAFSA. And technically you could, but your type of status would prevent you from actually getting the funds. So that's why sometimes it's just as counselors too, really good to fact find and lead the student through that conversation of like, oh, shoot, if you have an employment authorization card, you don't qualify for federal aid, but I will help you find alternate sources of funding like private scholarships. At the end of these slides, I have an entire slide with 5 of my most favorite scholarship resources. I'm going to get to that in my comments, but in case I forget to highlight it again, or in case you are coming back to these slides and you forget, I just want to remind you, I do include scholarship resources later in these slides. So what does this mean more specifically for applying for financial aid? So when we talk about financial aid for college, we're talking about so many different fountains. We're talking about federal aid, state aid, and the aid that we can get from colleges. So when I talk about the green card holders being eligible for financial aid, I'm talking about the federal aid, right, and the state aid. So for FAFSA, only students with a green card or that are citizens with a social security number can apply and receive federal funds. If you are a student that has a social security number because you are a permanent resident or a citizen, but your parents are undocumented, you can fill out the FAFSA, you can get money, and it doesn't really matter that your parents are undocumented. In fact, you can fill out all zeros for them instead of a social security number, and you can still receive financial aid if you are a resident, permanent resident, or a citizen. For the CSS profile, the CSS profile is a second type of financial aid application used for some or several private colleges in the United States. So not every private college requires the CSS profile, only some. The good news about the CSS profile is that all students may apply, all students can receive institutional funds. What I mean by institutional funds, money from the colleges themselves. And so the colleges themselves, the private ones that require the CSS profile, collect information via the CSS profile about you and your family and your income to then be able to give you money from their own pocket, right? From the college's own funds. So if you're an undocumented student and you're getting a little discouraged because you don't qualify for federal aid via the FAFSA, I would encourage you to ask your counselor at your high school, what are some private colleges that I may be able to apply to, and when can we fill out the CSS profile if they do require the CSS profile? Now, I got a question from someone about undocu-friendly colleges, and I would just want to define, the question was, are there any undocu-friendly colleges? And remember what I said about my slide at the beginning of the presentation. There is no federal law saying you can't apply to a college, especially a private college. So from that perspective, all private colleges can be undocu-friendly, like friendly to undocumented students, as in you can apply and we will then accept you or not. We'll read your application. But there are different levels of undocu-friendliness. There are some colleges that kind of do the bare minimum and say, yep, you can apply, we'll read your application, we'll accept you or deny you, but we may not have a lot of money to give you. So that would be a college that's less undocu-friendly. There are other colleges that do that. They say, yep, you can apply, because most of them will say, yes, you can apply. We'll read your application, we'll either accept you or deny you. And not only that, but we have money set aside to give you from our own pockets in the form of merit financial aid, meaning money based on your merits, potentially GPA, right? The higher your GPA, the more money we might be able to give you. That to me is a very undocu-friendly college. There are lists online. If you Google undocu-friendly colleges, there are lists online that exist that tell you which four-year colleges are known for being extra generous and extra friendly for undocumented students. So I encourage you to Google that and you'll find a bunch of lists. What you will notice though, is that on those lists are mostly the most competitive selective colleges in the United States. What do we know about the most competitive selective colleges in the United States? They tend to be some of the most wealthy colleges in the United States. So even though they're harder to get into, they will give you more money, especially if they're really undocu-friendly. They don't care, a lot of them won't care about status, they'll give you money. So if you're a student right now, and I don't know what grades you are right now watching, but if you're maybe a 9th or 10th grader, I would encourage you to work on that GPA, get it as high without stressing too much, but work hard, do your thing, keep those grades up. Now, if you're an 11th grader, this means you have 2 years before your high school career is over. You can do a lot of good to that GPA in 2 years. If you're a high school senior, and maybe you have a high GPA and you think it's high and you're really confident, that's awesome. If you're a senior right now watching this and you're like, oh shoot, my GPA is a little bit on the lower side, I'm not feeling as confident, my advice to you is really focus in quarter 1 and quarter 2, that upward progression, no matter where you came from in your GPA, if colleges can see that you kind of went up a little bit, that will really be helpful when you're applying to colleges. Now, later on in this presentation, I'm going to talk a little bit about what it means more specifically and some strategies depending on your GPA. So if you have a GPA that's maybe below a 3, a GPA between a 3 and a 3.5, and maybe a GPA that's a little bit closer to 4. But I think the moral of the story here is that yes, federal financial aid is unattainable to students who are undocumented. You're really only missing out on about $10,000 of grants and loans. Yes, $10,000 is a lot, but it's not an amount that will completely block you from going to college. there are ways to make up that difference. And there are ways that you can work with your counselor to be really strategic and really creative about maximizing your chances. Now, this is something that your counselor might know a lot about, or maybe your counselor is a little bit newer to this and maybe they won't be able to completely guide you in the ways that you're thinking they should. Have faith, keep pushing your counselor, do the research with them, reach out to me, other resources. I think as a team, you and your counselor should be working very closely, especially your senior year, to craft a college list that's really strategic and is full of different types of colleges, some that maybe are a little easier to get into, but that maybe your counselor knows will give you more of their own money, or maybe colleges that are kind of a reach for you, but you're trying really hard senior year. And if you get in, they'll give you a lot of money. So work with your counselor, have them reach out to people like me or other resources, and keep those communication lines open with your counselor. There are 2 questions in the chat. Someone's asking, does a green card grant you financial aid? So to clarify, yeah, the green card, a permanent resident card, grants you federal financial aid, which is awesome. And then it also grants you institutional aid from the colleges. So if colleges, remember, if colleges are very undocumented friendly, they'll give their money to all types of students. So that's awesome. The federal aid is a little bit tougher to get if you don't have a status. But if you have a permanent resident card, you can get federal financial aid, which includes grants, the Pell Grant, which is about $6,000, and includes loans, which is a direct student staffer loan, which would be under your name, and it's about $5,500 a year for that. Someone else asked, I always seem to run into issues with filling out applications and the question of citizenship with only citizen, resident, and non-immigrant visa options. What's the best way to respond? So I would love for this student to maybe, can you clarify what types of forms are you filling out? Are you filling out the FAFSA form, the CSS profile form, or other forms? If you could maybe clarify, I think I might be able to answer your question a little bit better, but I feel you on that. Sometimes forms don't give all the options. Will you send us access? Oh yeah, Julie, you're on this question. Awesome. All right, so on the topic of statuses, before we leave this topic, I want to be super clear, especially for my students and families in the audience. Nobody should ever ask you what your immigration status is, especially in high school. All right, that is a breach of privacy. Shouldn't be done. So if you're walking across the hall or in a class or something, your teacher or counselor should never ask you, hey, what is your immigration status? And if that happens, you should probably let them know they shouldn't do that and maybe just let someone know. But I want to be so clear. There are certain moments where you telling someone your status, not only is it allowed and very good and kind of scary, right? Because that's something, oftentimes our immigration status is something that we feel a little bit scared about disclosing. But if you do it to someone that you trust, it's like your high school counselor, your guidance counselor, social worker, someone in your school that you trust to keep that information kind of on the DL, but that you feel comfortable disclosing to, that can be really helpful. And so, like I said, no one can ask you your status, but you can offer up that information if the moment is right and you trust that person, and you opening up in that way can give you a lot of help, right? I have students who maybe I don't know their status until they tell me. And in that moment, I get activated and I say, all right, now that I know your status, thank you for sharing that with me. I'm going to try to help you in a different way, in a way that's more tailored to what you actually need. When people know your status, when you share it with 1 or 2 people that you trust, you might be able to get an ally that can help you search for scholarships, get application help, perhaps even connect you to a legal resource. So it's just important to know the difference, but know that you can self-disclose in a really safe way And I encourage my high school students currently watching to think about if you have someone in your life that you could feel comfortable self-disclosing to, that would then in turn help you and be on this journey with you the rest of your high school career. It is also safe to disclose to colleges. Now, this is a question I get all the time. Is it safe to tell a college I'm undocumented? And yes, it is safe. If you feel uncomfortable about that, talk to someone about it. In my 9 years as a counselor, I've had many undocumented students apply to college. It's better to be upfront with the college about being undocumented than not saying you're undocumented, and then months and months later, you tell them you are. That could shift your financial aid and could make the plan kind of erupt in a not so good way. So it's better to lead with honesty. It's better to find ways to self-disclose. The easiest way to self-disclose to a private college is via their CSS profile. If it is the CSS profile college, there's a section in the CSS profile, and just to clarify, I'm talking about the second financial aid form. There's a space in the CSS profile that is called special circumstances. You can type into that box. That is a great way to self-disclose. And that is often how my students self-disclose, is by typing a little sentence saying, I currently have this type of visa. I would love to see if there are any resources and help that your institution might be able to give me. That is a very simple, short blurb. The college's financial aid office will read that, and that's a way that you can self-disclose. A second way that you can self-disclose is by connecting with someone in the admissions office or the scholarship office in the college who works with multicultural students, or just really anyone at the college, calling them up. Maybe your counselor can help you make this call. Don't get discouraged if someone at the college doesn't know the answer. This is something that I know colleges are working on. Not everyone in a college admissions office is going to know how to field your question, especially if it's very specific to your status or being undocumented. This is something that often frustrates my students, in that they gather up their courage, they call it an admissions office at a college, and they want to ask a question about their application, and they want to potentially even say, hi, I am applying as an undocumented student, but I go to high school here in the United States. How are you going to handle my application? I have some questions. That's a very sort of simple question that a lot of colleges actually have trouble answering if you're just getting someone at the front desk. So my message to my students here watching is, don't get discouraged if someone doesn't know the answer to one of your questions at the colleges. Keep trying, ask your high school counselor office for help, and you should have that ally there that can maybe even make the call with you. Because of FERPA is a federal act, so it passed on the federal level. Colleges are prohibited from releasing information to other people unless they're under court order. So your information that you're sending to colleges via potentially the Common App or the college's own application is pretty tightly guarded by the college. So you should not fear self-disclosing from that angle as well.
And can I just ask this other question that I think is still topical right here? I always seem to run into issues when filling out applications on the question of citizen, with only citizen, resident, and non-immigrant visa options. What's the best way to respond?
Yeah, so yes, thank you. I saw this question earlier, and I'm not 100% sure the form that the person is asking about. So let me express. So if you're filling out the FAFSA, for example, the FAFSA is the federal form. Maybe you have a social security number. Maybe you're a permanent resident. You have that green card, but you're filling out the form. There's usually that third category called eligible non-citizen. So you're not a citizen, but you are still eligible for federal financial aid because you have that green card, that permanent resident card. There's another category, non-eligible non-citizen, which stinks. And I wish it wasn't this way. would be if you had potentially a non-immigrant visa or some other status that doesn't qualify you for financial aid. So any of the ones that in my previous slide weren't highlighted. If you're filling out your Common App, so the actual application for college, you can, so this is kind of tricky. And I should have probably looked at the Common App before coming on here. But if it's the same as last year, this is where it gets tricky. And a lot of my students have actually denoted that they are citizens of a different country, and it allows you to do that. So it allows you to say, for example, I am a citizen of Mexico and I don't have, right? Then you wouldn't put in anything else for US citizen or permanent resident number. You would just say that you are a citizen of another country. That is another way that you actually self-disclose to the college, saying this is what I have. I'm a citizen of this country. I'm not a citizen of the US. I don't have any other documents. But you are still a citizen somewhere, and you are disclosing that. And they can deduce from that information and lack of other information that you could be undocumented. So that is another way that students can use that form, the Common App, to self-disclose. I would still.
I think that's what it was. I think it was an admissions college application question. So perfect. I think that may answer it.
Yeah, and I would still follow up with the college. So talk to your guidance counselor, talk to your high school counselor, do a little research. A lot of colleges now on their web pages do have a section where they talk about their policies, their financial aid policies and admissions policies for undocumented students. So some colleges treat undocumented students, even though they go to high school in the US, as international applicants. That's entirely common. That it should be found on their website. So ask your guidance counselor or high school counselor if you're feeling confused about that, to kind of go through your college list with you, help you do a little research on the back end. If you're still unsure about how a certain college will handle your application if you're undocumented, that's when I would follow up with a phone call. And yeah, get help if you need that. Sometimes that first phone call can be a little bit scary. Good questions, everyone. In Massachusetts, do you remember that map I showed you, how Massachusetts didn't have any color? That's because we don't have any tuition equity laws. Remember what those are? Tuition equity laws means that undocumented, documented, it's all the same. Every student has access to the same type of financial aid at public colleges. Massachusetts doesn't have that. That is what we're working toward right now. That's what advocates are working toward. That would be ideal. But in the meantime, if you have DACA, Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, or temporary protective status, many Massachusetts public colleges like UMass Boston, UMass Amherst, UMass Dartmouth, Framingham State, Salem State, Bunker Hill Community College, all of our public campuses, a lot of them are giving temporary protective status holders, work authorization holders, that blue and red card I showed you, and DACA beneficiaries access to in-state tuition, which would be paying that in-state, that more reduced, that cheaper rate at those public colleges. So if you're someone that isn't undocumented, but isn't a permanent resident, isn't a citizen, you're like, have a status in between, you have a work authorization, it is highly encouraged that you double check with your college's admissions office if you would be eligible for in-state tuition, which is huge savings at a public college. It is so much cheaper than paying out-of-state tuition at a public college. When you're in high school, though, as you're applying, if you're a senior or younger, I highly encourage you to ask your counselors about some different strategies like dual enrollment, CLEP exams, or AP exams. These are different types of strategies that could get you some college credit while you're in high school. Even if it's just one college class credit, that's still three credits, because sometimes college classes are 3 credits. You'll learn more about that when you're in college. But even if it's just one class worth, you're doing a little bit earlier in high school, that can still save you thousands of dollars. So let me give you an example. Some high schools have dual enrollment programs that have partnerships with some public or private colleges where their high school students can enroll in college level classes and get credit for those while they're still in high school. The only difference here is that some high schools have dual enrollment programs with public colleges, and some high schools have dual enrollment programs with private colleges. Now, there's always a question of where the funding is coming from if it's a public college agreement. And unfortunately, some public colleges receive state funding or federal funding and can't allocate that funding toward undocumented students. Again, that stinks. But check with your high school counselor, check with your high school, because that might not be the case with the college that's doing the dual enrollment at your high school. You might still be able to participate. And it's usually not the case with a private college. At my high school, for example, we have a dual enrollment program with a private college that accepts all students regardless of status, and it's completely free to enroll in that college class. So double check. For my college counselors here in the room, or for anyone that has any sort of say in a high school program or the administration, this is a point where a simple advocacy letter or you talking to your principal can kind of shift the game a little bit. Dual enrollment is an amazing opportunity for so many students, but especially undocumented students, since it would allow for them to get free college classes and college credits. CLEP exams are a lesser known, less popular choice. They're basically exams administered by the College Board, similar to the SAT or AP exams. These would also give you college credits. Now, CLEP exams are not accepted by all colleges. So you have to be really smart if you are thinking of like, I want to get some college credits. Research your college to see if they accept CLEP exams as college credit replacements. Several community colleges in the Massachusetts or in the Boston area do accept CLEP exams. I had a student a few years ago who was fluent in Spanish, and she took a CLEP exam in Spanish and was able to satisfy one of her elective credit requirements for college. Again, it didn't save her that much time or money, but it was several $1,000s that she saved in not having to take one extra elective class when she got to college. And then AP or IB exams. If you're in any AP classes, study hard, get at least a 4 or 5 on your test, and you will be able, hopefully, many colleges accept AP exams to bypass certain classes in the curriculum once you get to college, and you, again, save a little time and money. And then I want to wrap up sort of this spiel that I'm giving you with just some other tips and tricks that I've learned over the years. If you're a high school student right now watching this, and I don't know what grades you're in, but you're thinking about tackling this topic, I hope that you are talking to your high school counselor. But on your own, you should ask yourselves these 4 questions. And this can be for anyone, regardless of immigration status. What are your interests? What makes you happy? Does your ideal career path need a work permit? Do you have a work permit? If not, have you considered going to a legal screening to see if there's options for you? Are there ways that you can become a self-employed person for your chosen career? I have an example that's happening right now. One of my seniors is undocumented, and she wants to go into beauty. She wants to go to beauty school. She wants to be a hairdresser. She wants to be a hairdresser. She wants to work with people. She's very personable. She has awesome skills. And we've been kind of working toward finding a program for her that is not very long. She will have to pay some money, but she's been saving up. And we have been sort of mapping out what her career will look like. Is she going to own her own business, which you can when you're undocumented? You can file taxes when you're undocumented. You just use an ITIN number. Or maybe she becomes self-employed, right? Maybe she contracts out with a salon and she does her career that way. I know a lot of undocumented people that are self-employed, work for themselves, are consultants, independent contractors. And that is a way that while you're kind of seeing if you are eligible for any statuses, that can take years, unfortunately, in this country. You can still be working for yourself. You can still be studying. You can still be earning a living in something that you love. So think outside the box a little bit. Think about different jobs that you could do with the knowledge that you have now, but also with extra training. A lot of careers don't require 4 full years of college to get there. A lot do. So I'm not discouraging you from doing 4-year college, but really ask yourself that. What makes you happy? And what training do I need for that? And financial support. Have you been working? Have you been saving? Will you have support from others? I would encourage all of my students here right now to start applying for private scholarships now, especially if you're seniors. There are limited, compared to all the scholarships that exist, a limited pool for undocumented students, but they do exist. So the earlier that you start applying for them, the better. Even if you haven't quite mapped out or figured out where you want to go for college or what you want your training to be after high school, start applying now. If you don't get them, you can at least have time to plan. And if you do get them and you decide not to go to college, you can always turn them down. But I have a sneaky feeling that if you get a scholarship, you'll probably end up using it. So it's in your best interest to start applying earlier. Always check the eligibility criteria of a private scholarship and the fine print. Does it mention that you must be a citizen or a permanent resident? A lot of times, private scholarships, they have their own rules, their own requirements. They're given out by private organizations, not by the colleges and not by the federal government or the state. So any private entity that gives out a private scholarship can make their own rules and they have their own agenda. Oftentimes, when you go to the main page of the scholarship, they might just highlight some of the basic eligibility requirements, but when you dig a little deeper, there's a little bit of fine print. So when you're an undocumented student, unfortunately, I'm just going to name it, you have that extra burden of saying, not every college, not every private scholarship is going to fit me, and I wish it weren't this way, but I'm going to muster up the energy to sift through and find the ones that are for me, even if that means spending a little bit more time sifting through the fine print. If once you sift through the fine print, you still don't see anything that says you have to be a citizen or a permanent resident to apply, you go for it. Double check with your high school counselor. Maybe they know something you weren't able to find, but I would say go for it. Always meet the deadlines and check both for private for national scholarships and local scholarships. The difference, a national scholarship will be open to students from all states. Something like given out by a big company, a big corporation, big name restaurants or big name organizations nationally. A lot of times they don't have citizenship requirements in their scholarship. Go for it. National scholarships are awesome, but just know that oftentimes they're more competitive because they tend to be larger sums of money. As a high school counselor, I usually advise my students to go for the local scholarships. Less students apply, they're more local, often a smaller amount of money, but because it's a less crowded pool of applicants, you might actually have a bigger shot at getting them. Now, again, this advice can apply to any student, regardless of immigration status, but for undocumented students, this is so much more important. So please carve out time to start applying for scholarships now. On average, all of my undocumented students in the past few years have found 4 or 5 scholarships to apply for. They might get 1. It's still a change maker. It can make all the difference. So cast a wide net, don't get discouraged, seek out help. These are my 4 top resources for private scholarships. Different states have their own resource guides. Unfortunately, in Massachusetts, it's a little bit more limited. We have some work to do in terms of, the state does, in terms of the support that they give their undocumented high school population. I really like Immigrants Rising. This is an organization that if you haven't Googled them already, please do. They have so many resources for immigrants. I'm on their weekly book market. They even have a scholarship resource for graduate work. So if you are an undocumented student planning to get advanced degrees like a master's or other things, they even have scholarship resources for that older population. So check them out first. Even though they're number 4 on this list, I really, really like them. All these links are in the slides, which hopefully you already clicked from the chat. And then I just want to wrap up by talking directly to my students here. If your GPA currently is a 3.8 or higher, you are doing great. You're awesome. Everyone's awesome, regardless of their GPA, but a 3.8, like this, nothing just to be humble about. Like this is awesome. So definitely start connecting if you're senior with your high school counselor right now, and they can help you craft a list. You may have access to some of the more selective colleges, which remember sometimes can give out the most scholarship money. So be really smart about applying to a lot. Ask for your high school counselor if they give you fee waivers. That means that you might not have to pay for the application fee, which could enable you to apply to more scholarships. I really want to encourage you and your families to ask questions. Being first gen and an immigrant is really hard. People will be helping you, try to help you. Make sure your voice is also being heard. What's important to you? And where are you willing to take risks? I often tell my students that they should apply to a bunch of colleges. And if one is a little bit further away and they're a little bit scared, to reach out, to talk to people, to try to go visit. I think some of my students are a little bit scared sometimes to go out of state when they're undocumented. But I think sometimes applying out of state can yield some really good results in the money department and in the admissions department. If your GPA is a little bit lower than that, you're still awesome. Think about a fancy term that counselors often use but don't always share with students, which is something we like to say strategic undermatching. There, I said it. Think about where your GPA is. Ask your counselor, hey counselor, this is where my GPA is. What colleges are like going to be a little harder for me to get into, and which colleges are going to be a little easier for me to get into? And sometimes if your GPA is kind of between a 3.7, that higher pool of colleges is still accessible to you if you submit a strong application. So you should still go for it. And also some of the colleges are easier for you to get into. You're going to shine in that pool, especially if you're undocumented. You know, you're going to try to be creative. So talk to your counselors about that kind of college. I had an undocumented student last year who applied to one of the colleges in the Boston area that I told her, I was like, they tend to give good financial aid. If you live at home and don't live on campus, you could save on room and board. And I know that you have a 3.5 GPA, you'll be able to get their sort of highest level of school scholarship, the merit money. And you're going to really shine in their pool. They tend to accept students around a 3.0, 3.1. You're going to shine. They might give you more merit aid. So those are the kind of conversations that counselors, don't be shy about being completely transparent with your undocumented students about this. It can really help them in the long run. And students, don't be shy about asking these questions of your counselors. They're there to help you. Now, if you're sitting there and thinking, oh boy, my GPA is a little lower than the 3.0, you're still awesome. And yeah, sure, it might not be as high as other people. You can still make your goals a reality. It is true, I'm not going to sugarcoat this. If you still want to go to four-year college, you can make that happen. It might just look a little different. And eventually, you can get to that college that you want to go to. It just might be a little bit of a longer road. Because, yeah, there are some colleges that, tend to accept students with higher GPAs. And then right now in high school, your GPA is a little bit on the lower side. I've had students, undocumented students, DACA students, TPS students start at a 2-year college and then transfer. Again, this is advice for everyone, but if you're undocumented, be strategic about which ones you're going to spend your time in. Now, I am going to name drop here because it's so important that everyone kind of knows this. I could not speak more highly of Duet. This is a program here in Boston that connects students with associate's and bachelor's degrees through Southern New Hampshire University. They do have scholarships for undocumented students, and this is a way to get your 2-year or 4-year degree in an alternative way. So look them up. They're awesome. I'm going to sing their praises. But other colleges like Endicott Boston, Benjamin Franklin Institute of Technology, Quincy College, UMass Online, they're 2-year options that are private, but can sometimes be very attainable for an undocumented student, and then you can then transfer on to a four-year college after that. If you have a work permit though, if you don't have a green card, but you have a work permit, think about vocational programs or career and technical apprenticeships. A lot more doors open for you once you have that little work permit. So again, I hope I planted a seed for you that like right now you don't have a work permit. You're thinking, I wonder if my family could qualify for something. Maybe I am missing something. I hope that you seek out some legal resources. Maybe go to a free legal screening through the city of Boston and just fact find, see what's available. I had a student a few years ago go to one of these legal screenings. Their family thought they had no legal options. They went to a really safe, trusted resource for a legal screening at an agency in Boston that had a really good reputation for helping the community, was on the MIRA's directory. They had a 30-minute legal screening. Come to find out, there was one little part of their story that qualified them for asylum, and that was kind of a huge breakthrough for them. And it's true that in the US, once you're in a legal proceeding or an immigration proceeding, it can take years for that to develop. There's a backlog right now of cases in the immigration sphere, but at least you have something going and it doesn't hurt to ask. And so that family set up, they're currently still in that process. It's probably going to be years until they finalize that, but something is in the works. And meantime, the student's going to college, they're studying, and hopefully 4 years down the road, there'll be some movement there with their status and she can start working or getting a work permit. So think outside the box, be a little brave, you've got this. And then I just want to wrap up with just sharing that you have access to this part 3, which is just more resources for you. These are the 2 resources that I've mentioned. The MIRA Coalition has a registry of legal agencies, and the City of Boston has immigration clinics. If you are a high school student and you're looking to build community or just be part of a community that kind of is going through what you're going through, I always recommend looking into SIM, the Student Immigration Movement. Here in Massachusetts, they're student run and student led, but it's a beautiful community of also immigrant students and mostly undocumented students coming together. So if you're a high school student looking to find others, ask questions, begin a community, I really do love SIM. And I'm going to wrap up with 2 resources. I just would love my undocumented people in the audience to know that you have rights, you have power, you have a voice. If at any point you have doubted that, please stay up to date on your rights and what people are saying out there in terms of how you can protect yourself. One of the easiest ways to do that is to print out a red card that you can show, you can use if anyone ever comes up to you or something happens where you need to kind of defend your status or not and show that you have rights. I really encourage all of us and all the counselors in the room to print out red cards for your students, and then stay up to date with DACA. A lot is happening in the news right now with DACA. They're not accepting new applications as of right now, but they are accepting renewal applications. Things are changing every single day with this. My favorite resource for staying up to date, especially for my students in the room, is United We Dream, and it's linked here. They post updates on DACA as soon as things happen, and I love them a lot. So with that, I'm going to pause or end and ask Julie if we got any other questions in the chat as we were going through.
I don't see any other questions, but we'll give people a moment. We do have a lot of people saying thank you, Andrea. So yeah, a lot of good information. And I'll just say out loud, I put this in the chat, that Andrea is going to be presenting this exact webinar in Spanish on November 4th at 6:30 p.m. So, if you know others that might be a helpful webinar, please pass that along, and people can register the same way as you did for this one. So let's see. Do you have any suggestions on how to open this conversation with parents?
Yeah, that is a great question. Thank you so much to whoever asked that. This is one of the things where there's like a really complicated answer and a really easy answer. The highlight or the common thread in both is trust. There's got to be some base level of trust there first before any of these topics can be bridged. And I think the easiest way counselors or staff can build trust with students is by showing them that they're open to receiving that information. And ways that we can show that we're open to receiving information is to send either very direct or indirect messages to students that we're open. A direct thing could be sharing resources on your school website or sending out a newsletter to families saying, hey, I just attended this training as a counselor. If you have questions, reach out to me. That can be very direct. Indirect can be hanging up posters, giving out red cards at family nights, sharing, what you know indirectly, maybe with students in passing. That way students can know, oh, she gets this. And she might not be an expert, but I've heard her talk about this. I know she would be open to receiving this if I asked her about this. I'm saying her as if it's for me. I don't know your pronouns, but those are my pronouns. And so I would start with building that trust. And then when a counselor's in a family meeting, I always lead with a really open question, which is maybe after you've already talked about, some family circumstances or more technical things, you can just say, hey, so I really can't wait to keep working with you this year. I'm just so honored to be your counselor. Any more information or any other things that you might want to share with me that could affect your process in any way, I'm totally open. And even if I don't know all the answers, I will walk with you on this journey to figure it all out. So feel free to share anything else that you think would be useful for me to know. And that open invitation, they may not answer right away, but can at least open the door for future conversations. They'll remember that and hopefully they come to trust you. I hope that was helpful.
Another comment that maybe you can just speak to a little bit as well, which is the fact that students may not know they're undocumented. And so that can be a challenging situation.
Yeah, or they may not know that they have one of those more specific statuses that aren't quite the well-known statuses. So I think that's probably the next layer. So after that trust is built, even just a little bit of trust at the beginning of the year between counselors and student, it'll come up very quickly. If you have a suspicion, and this is where I would advise all my counselors to maybe watch the last webinar for counselors, because there are sort of signs that I think students and counselors can be aware of, students with their friends who are counselors to students, is that if a student maybe gets really nervous around a topic or doesn't want to go out for certain opportunities like jobs or driver's licenses, that is a very real issue that I went through, that many of us go through. So those can be sort of signs that something's up, and students appreciate when you ask, I'm here for you. Do you need any help? And once students say, hey, I'm kind of nervous, I think this is happening or this might not happen, then you can ask more sort of probing questions of does this have to do with applying for college? Does it have to do applying for money? Do you know if you are eligible for all of that? And then if the student doesn't know, that's when the family context comes in. You can call the family and say, hey, I've been noticing maybe your students just feeling really nervous about this. Do you have anything you want to share with me? Again, you can't ask their immigration status, but you can be there as a caring adult. And hopefully after a few interactions can peel away at some of those layers. And then if all else fails, my students, when they're going through financial aid, that is usually when we all kind of come to a consensus of what is possible and what's not, but we hopefully don't want to wait until they're seniors applying for financial aid.
Andrea, thank you so much. And thank you everyone for the great questions and great engagement. And I will forward the recording and the slides to you tomorrow. And so happy to be here with you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thanks all for tuning in.
Thank
Good
you.
luck this year.